Time is precious, and so are our pets. So time with our pets is extra precious. That's why we started Dutch. Dutch provides 24/7 access to licensed vets, with unlimited virtual visits and follow-ups for up to 5 pets. You can message a vet at any time and schedule a video visit the same day. Our vets can even prescribe medication for many ailments, and shipping is always free. With Dutch, you'll get more time with your pets and year-round peace of mind when it comes to their vet care.
Hi everyone, Laszlo Montgomery here with another China History Podcast episode. Today, I wanted to look at the Grand Canal and some of China's historical waterways and try and offer up an appreciation and understanding the roles of canals in general and the Dayunhe specifically in the development of Chinese history. It's the longest canal in the world and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It runs for 1,115 miles, or 1,794 kilometers, from Beijing to Hangzhou, or the distance from New York to Orlando, London to Rome, or Moscow to Warsaw. It passes through the provinces of Hebei, Shandong, Jiangsu, and Zhejiang. Prior to the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, there was no greater achievement in hydraulic engineering than the Grand Canal. It has a rather interesting history and is really kind of an unsung hero as far as its importance in China, especially during the 1,331 years from Sui to Qing. So let's look at how the canal came to be built and what its contribution was in Chinese history. It wasn't a canal like the Suez Canal. It went from north to south, but not in a straight line. And just as Meng Tian joined the 3 walls of Qin, Zhao, and Yan to form a single Great Wall in the 3rd century BC, so it was with the Grand Canal. Between the time of the spring and autumn period of the Eastern Zhou to the time of Emperor Sui Yangdi in the late 6th century AD, a lot of canals had already been dug throughout the watered world of South and Central China. And just as China wasn't blessed with both a west and east coast, it also got the short end of the geographical stick when it came to rivers that ran longitudinally. Egypt had the Nile, Europe the Rhine, the Danube, and the Oder. Asia had the Chao Phraya, the Irrawaddy, and the Mekong, and in America there was the Mississippi River. Because of this simple twist of fate, in order to move goods, troops, and food shipments from the south to the north of China, where the political center was, they had to construct the Grand Canal. That was the primary intention all along. China's central plain has 5 great rivers. All of them flowed eastward towards the sea. North to south, these were the Haihe, that connected Beijing and Tianjin and the Bohai Sea, the Yellow River, of course, that runs from the Tibetan Plateau in Qinghai to the sea. The Huaihe flows from southern Henan through Anhui and Jiangsu. Then there's the longest river in all of Asia, the Yangtze, that flows for 3,915 miles from the peaks of Qinghai to the sea, emptying out in and around Shanghai. Last, there was the Qiantang River, famous for its tidal bore, that runs from the borders of Jiangxi and Anhui eastward past Hangzhou and emptying out into the East China Sea near Ningbo. 5 rivers, and they all played front and center roles in the construction of the Grand Canal. Among China's great underrated heroes were these hydraulic engineers who had the smarts to utilize any watercourses like rivers, along with dikes, embankments, locks, dams, culverts, bridges, and other mechanical structures devised and manufactured to assist in regulating the flow of water, all the while taking into consideration every manner of potential geographical obstacle. And there were many. Uneven slopes and always having to be vigilant in maintaining navigable water levels. It's believed the earliest civil engineering project that attempted to tame China's waterways were the dikes built by Duke Huan of Qi along the lower reaches of the Yellow River. Tradition might point to Yu the Great as China's first hydraulic engineer, but from the earliest times, China's engineers carried out many small-scale projects that would connect rivers and lakes using the least amount of excavation and in the shortest possible amount of time. In the ancient Chu and Wu states, with their multitude of lakes and rivers, many small local canals were dug. The Hongkou, mentioned in a few ancient texts, is the earliest artificial canal connecting the Yellow River near Kaifeng with the Si and Bian rivers. The Si is a major tributary of the Huai. This most ancient of canals served as a model for future canals. In the record of the grand historian, Sima Qian called the Hongkou a connecting link that joined the 5 warring states of Zhao, Wei, Song, Zheng, and Chen. As it would often be with China's canals, including the Grand Canal, the Hongkou was an ingenious use of existing waterways more than it was a large-scale excavation of a canal. Construction began in 360 BC during the reign of King Hui of Wei, just after he moved his capital to Daliang, present-day Kaifeng, and this waterway became one of the main water transportation lines in the Central Plains region. And like I said, this connected the 2 major rivers of the Yellow and the Huai. The Hankou is a little more famous. This was the canal built by the king of Wu state, Fu Chai, as stated in the Zuozhuan. In 486 BC, Fu Chai ordered the construction of the Hankou to link the Yangtze and the Huai rivers. What drove the pugnacious Fu Chai to build the Hankou was easier access for the Wu troops to fight in his northern campaigns. It took 3 years, and like with the Hongkou, it used a series of canals linking existing waterways, lakes, and marshlands. During these warring states' times, a great number of water projects were carried out in many of the Zhou states. The most famous one is probably the Zhengguo Qu, or the Zhengguo Canal, mentioned in both the Record of the Grand Historian and the Book of Han, and, well, if I may be so bold, in past CHP episodes as well. The story of Zhengguo and the canal that bears his name is one of the more celebrated stories from these times. Zhengguo was a hydraulic engineer from Han. Han was one of the 4 states, the smallest and weakest of the 4, who bordered the fast-growing kingdom of Qin. This story maintains that in 246 BC, Zhengguo was sent from Han to Qin to distract their mightiest of kings, Zhao Xiang. In order to take his mind off invading Han, he was able to trick the Qin king into building this canal between the Jing and Luo rivers, 93 miles long. The source of the Jing River was in Ningxia, and it flowed in a south-southeasterly direction, emptying out in the Wei just north of Xi'an. According to historical accounts, the Han court in Yuzhou, in that most ancient part of Henan province, attempted a strategy to weaken Qin. The plan called for dispatching Zhengguo to Xianyang to propose this enormous irrigation project. Zhengguo was able to convince the Qin court of the potential transformation such a canal could make, irrigating the rather dry Guanzhong plain. But the hidden agenda devised at the Han court was to divert Qin's attention away from further conquest and instead lead them to use their manpower to build this massive undertaking. In doing so, the Han ruler King Huanhui believed this would inhibit Qin from attacking Han. Zhengguo was able to pull off this ruse, and work began on this irrigation project. The only problem was that Qin court figured out they were being duped. But despite the Han state's initial intention to weaken Qin, work continued until it was completed. And this Zhengguo Canal, as it came to be known, turned out to be a game changer for Qin state. The Zhengguo Canal significantly improved agricultural productivity, turning previously barren lands on the Guanzhong plain into fertile fields. And this, in turn, boosted agricultural security and did wonders in catapulting Qin up another couple notches. With all this food security and the growth of the economy and the population, it ultimately supported further Qin military campaigns. So well did this newfound wealth and agricultural output affect the kingdom of Qin. Not too long after it was operational and had performed all the miracles that irrigation projects produce, all warring states were vanquished, and in 221 BC, King Yingzheng was able to establish the Qin dynasty and rule as China's first emperor. The canal remained an important irrigation system for centuries and stands as a testament to the transformative power of large-scale irrigation projects. Great Wall builder and possibly the inventor of the guzheng, Meng Tian, he too employed his engineering skills to build canals just west of the Ordos region near Zhongwei and Ningxia. I read that remnants of Meng Tian's canals are still around today, 22 centuries later. In 214 BC, Qin Shi Huang signed off on another of the many projects credited to his dynasty, brief as it was. This was another canal called the Lingqu. This one is located in the northeastern part of Guangxi, not far from Guilin. The Lingqu connects the Xiang River, a tributary of the Yangtze, with the Li River, a tributary of the Pearl River. It gave the Qin ruler a waterway that allowed access between the Yangtze and the Pearl River Delta. This did wonders in integrating the newly conquered but not yet subjugated south into the new Chinese Empire in the north. The many Baiyue people of the Lingnan region were in the first emperor's gun sights, and subjugating them provided the initial impetus for the Ling Canal. It was only 22.6 miles long. Nonetheless, that's all that was needed to connect the two river valleys. Needham had written in Science and Civilization, quote, "Learning the hard way, perseverance, and manpower were the features of ancient Chinese civil engineering," end quote. And Chairman Mao would say, more than 17 centuries after the opening of the Ling Canal, "Ren duo hao ban shi." With a lot of people, it's easy to get things done. There were more than these most famous of ancient canals. In Shu State, around 256 BC, prior to the building of the Zhengguo Canal, Li Bing constructed the Dujiangyan Dam, and this marvel of engineering effectively controlled the flooding of the Min River, which from time to time would cause devastating floods on the Chengdu Plain. By channeling excess water away, the Dujiangyan Dam prevented this from happening, and in the process, turned that province into one of the breadbaskets of China. Throughout the first centuries of the Common Era, later Han, Three Kingdoms, and the Jin, the ancient Chinese people who lived anywhere near the great rivers tried every possible method to do the same two things: limit the flooding and utilize the water for irrigation. Needham had written of the founding Han Emperor Gaozu, quote, "By the navigation of the lower Yellow River, the Honggo and Hango canals, the Yangtze, the Xiang River heading south from Dongting Lake, the Lingqu Canal, and the Xi River, the first Han Emperor in 200 BC, found himself in possession of a single trunk waterway extending from the 40th to the 22nd parallel of latitude. That is to say, 1,250 miles in a direct line, and doubtless more than double that as the vessel sailed." End quote. So all of these natural and artificial waterways that were built between the Zhou and the northern Zhou dynasties provided the lead-up to the Grand Canal of the Sui dynasty. Only two emperors in this dynasty, Yang Jian and Yang Guang, also known as Emperors Wen and Yang of Sui. They received credit for building the Grand Canal, but as we've seen, plenty of the digging had been going on pretty much non-stop since the Warring States period that ended in 221 BC. So we reach the Sui, 581 to 618. Not very long as major dynasties go. By then, late 6th, early 7th century, while the political center of China remained where it began, in the northern part of the country, the economic center had shifted to the newer southern regions and the Yangtze River Valley and south of there. And this would continue throughout the Tang Dynasty, and by the southern Song, the disparity in economies and in food production wasn't even close. And for this reason, the growing importance of the South and the criticality of this region to the state, the idea for a kind of grand North-South Canal made a lot of sense. Emperor Yang of Sui always gets the credit for being the one to build the Grand Canal, but well, he just signed off on the whole thing. The one who was actually tasked with designing and building it was one of the great unknowns from Chinese history. Sui and Tang Dynasty scholars, of course, know this guy, but the key builder of the Grand Canal and a whole lot more was a Xianbei Mongol named Yuan Kai. He served the Sui dynasty for 30 years as the chief engineer, and considering the number of building projects, many of them wasteful, he was kept constantly busy. He got his start in the Northern Zhou dynasty, 557 to 58, founded by someone from the Xianbei clan, Yuan Tai. Now, our hero, Yuan Kai, he first worked for the then Northern Zhou prime minister and future Sui dynasty founder, Yang Jian. Yuan Kai didn't just build the Grand Canal. As the go-to guy for anything related to urban planning or architecture, Yuan Kai designed the Sui capital in Chang'an for Emperor Wen, and later on he did the same thing in Luoyang, building a splendiferous new capital there for Emperor Yang. And as he did for Yang Jian during the Northern Zhou, Yuan Kai designed key government buildings and royal palaces. He was a loyal public servant and very much appreciated by Yang Jian. So appreciated was he that when Yang Jian established the Sui, when he wiped out the entire Xianbei Yuan clan, he spared Yuan Kai. At once, Yuan Kai found himself busy with various important projects, including the design and construction of the ancestral temple of the emperor. Most important was the new capital of Chang'an. That great and ancient city served as the capital of the Northern Zhou, but by the time of their demise, the city was in complete disrepair and in desperate need of a total makeover. Completed in 584, 3 years into the dynasty, the newly rebuilt capital was renamed Daxing, and at that time, in the late 6th century, Daxing was one of the largest cities in the world. Yuan Kai had it built in just 9 months, so early on, exhibiting that speed of construction that China is so famous for in the 21st century. After settling in, Emperor Wen discovered the matter of grain transport from the south up to the capital had some serious logistical problems. Not just the Yellow River, but other key waterways had long silted over and were simply no longer navigable. Because of this problem that always was and forever will be, the Sui capital was in jeopardy of not receiving sufficient grain to feed its people. For this main reason, Emperor Wen in 584 issued a zhao, or an imperial edict, calling for a canal to be built to ameliorate this little grain supply problem he had. Yuan Kai was called in to head up this mission to connect the new capital with the Yellow River. It called for digging a canal 300 miles east of Daxing to divert the Wei River so that it emptied into the Luo and ultimately Yellow River. And this was the 75-mile-long Guangtong Canal. Between 586 and 593, Yuan Kai fell out of favor due to court politics, but he did make a comeback when he pleased His Majesty to no end with the design and construction of the mausoleum for Emperor Wen's beloved Empress Dugu. Once restored to the emperor's good graces, he was called upon to be part of the team that built Emperor Wen's pleasure dome in the mountains southwest of Chang'an, the Renshou Palace. Then, in the summer of 604, Emperor Wen died at this Renshou Palace, where he spent his last years. Though he wasn't meant to become the next in line, this opened the door for Emperor Yang of Sui, and he kept Yuan Kai very busy building extensions to existing canals and the design of a national granary complex. And did I say palaces? Oh, Sui Yangdi was one of the greatest of the greats of imperial profligates.
Time is precious, and so are our pets. So time with our pets is extra precious. That's why we started Dutch. Dutch provides 24/7 access to licensed vets with unlimited virtual visits and follow-ups for up to 5 pets. You can message a vet at any time and schedule a video visit the same day. Our vets can even prescribe medication for many ailments, and shipping is always free. With Dutch, you'll get more time with your pets and year-round peace of mind when it comes to their vet care.
In constructing the Grand Canal, Yuan Kai and his fellow engineers had to deal with every single possible geographical obstacle. Chief among them was the Yellow River, with its highest volume of sediment content of any river in the world. Some of the innovations conceived, like many parts of the Grand Canal, are still in use today. At its highest point, the canal was 138 feet above sea level. In 605, Emperor Yang, Sui Yang Di, he formally called for both the construction of a new Dongdu, or eastern capital, in Luoyang, and a canal that would link his new capital to the Yangzhou region on the north bank of the Yangtze. 2 million workers, and 10 months later, the new capital was built. Sui Yang Di was pleased, to say the least. This wasn't the last time he would call on Yuan Kai to produce pleasure palaces throughout the land. At great expense, too, I might add. It made sense to move the Sui capital to Luoyang, as this city was closer and much more accessible to the prosperous regions of East Hebei and the Jiangnan region. This first canal, called the Tongji Canal, linked Yangdi's new eastern capital of Luoyang and the city of Sizhou on the Huai. This is modern-day Suzhou, not the famous Suzhou east of Taihu. This is the Anhui Suzhou. There, it hooked up with another older canal that led to the Yangtze. The eastern capital, Luoyang, was bisected in two by the Luo River. There was a northern and southern city. Between the architecture, opulence, and the eastern capital's proximity to key parts of the country, Emperor Yang was much more fortunate than his father and his Daxingcheng capital. I read that Yuan Kai did a much better job in Luoyang than he did in Chang'an. The Daxing capital contained some serious flaws, most notably the location where it had been built that made it hot and uncomfortable to reside in during the summer season. What Sui Emperor Yang was gunning for was an uninterrupted waterway that would allow him to ferry military assets, grain, and to foster domestic commerce. 5 million workers were called upon to do all the construction, most of them conscripted. By the way, with all the heat that the Turkic tribes in the north were causing, Emperor Yang also sent Yuan Kai to go build and reinforce parts of the Great Wall in order to deter these northerners from encroaching further into Chinese territory. In 612, Yuan Kai assisted the emperor in his conquest of Goguryeo with his bridge-building skills, and pretty much throughout his reign, Emperor Yang called for one expensive project after another, many of them canals. He very well may have bankrupted the Sui dynasty, but the utility value of all of these construction projects, the canals most of all, served as the linchpin for the domestic prosperity enjoyed by the Tang dynasty that followed in 618. And not only that, there was also the added benefits of more efficient cultural and political integration between North and South. And with the number of travelers from afar who came to China during this time, the canal also accelerated the spread of cosmopolitanism from south to north. You know, the great foreign trading ports of Guangzhou and Quanzhou get all the glamour shots in many of the history books. But back then, all the real action sailed up and down the Grand Canal, supplying the China domestic market with all their necessities of life and foodstuffs. Canals were also dug to complement the urban waterways that ran through some of the major domestic trading centers, Suzhou and Hangzhou perhaps most famously. The Grand Canal became critical to the domestic trade between North China and the increasingly prosperous Central and Jiangnan regions in the south. Yangzhou became the most important economic hub in the region due to its proximity to the Grand Canal. In 984, during the Northern Song, an assistant commissioner for transportation, Qiao Weiyue, invented the pound lock. A lock, that's a device used for raising and lowering boats and other kinds of watercraft, large and small, between stretches of water of different levels on rivers or canal waterways. The most famous locks are found in the Panama Canal, the Erie, Suez, and Utah canals. A pound lock has a chamber with gates at both ends that control the level of water in the pound. Again, this was invented by Qiao Weiyue in China, specifically for use on the Grand Canal. The Grand Canal wasn't immune to floods and the occasional upheavals that happened from time to time. In 1128, with the Jurchens closing in on Kaifeng, who can forget Du Chong's fateful decision to open the dikes of the Yellow River near Kaifeng? As we know, the Jurchens later smothered the Song and forced a rump imperial court to reconstitute itself in safer lands below the Yangtze, namely Hangzhou. But Du Chong's idea, though it certainly had the desired effect of bogging down the Jurchen troops and buying time for the Song rulers, it also devastated the landscape and killed millions, especially in the aftermath, when people were forced to inhabit completely uninhabitable lands. With all that Yellow River water rushing at it, the Grand Canal's banks, locks, mechanical and hydraulic facilities that made the whole system work were overwhelmed by the sudden rush of water. All that sediment carried by the Yellow River just inundated the Grand Canal and silted over the most vulnerable parts. And that put the Grand Canal out of business for the remainder of the Song. But then again, with the Jurchen Jin dynasty now in control of northern China, there wasn't much incentive to send any grain shipments that far north. Into the Yuan dynasty, the Grand Canal was repaired, maintained, and expanded. Engineers attempted to straighten it out and make it less circuitous. They were able to eliminate about 700 kilometers of bends and east-west maneuvering. In the early part of the dynasty, a new portion was dug across Shandong province that for a while linked Beijing with Hangzhou. The last segment of the Grand Canal was constructed in 1293 and ran 35 kilometers between Beijing and the outskirts of the city in Tongzhou. By the end of the dynasty, the canal fell into disrepair, and this stretch was abandoned during the Ming. During the Ming dynasty, the canal was more important than ever. Once the Yongle Emperor moved the capital to Beijing, there wasn't such a need for the canal to run past Kaifeng or Luoyang. By extending the Grand Canal to terminate in Beijing, for the first time, you had the actual Jinghang Dayunhe, or Beijing-Hangzhou Grand Canal, similar to what's around today. Between 1411 and 1415, the Grand Canal, under this bigger-than-life Ming emperor, was given a total facelift. We remember him most for the Forbidden City, the 7 voyages of Zheng He, and all his military campaigns, but he was a real champion of restoring the Grand Canal to its former glory. Remember, in the Ming Dynasty, the entire coastline was infested with pirates, and coastal transport was next to impossible. If you had to move cargo from north to south, this was the best way. With the exception of this 12th century disaster that closed the Grand Canal for a long stretch, from the Tang to the Qing dynasties, it had served as the main north-south artery for the country. Its importance for grain transport to the north was profound. Emperors sailed the Grand Canal to carry out their inspection tours, most noteworthy the Qing, Kangxi, and Qianlong emperors. Foreigners as well sailed the Grand Canal and wrote all about it. Marco Polo, Moroccan explorer and traveler Ibn Battuta, wrote it in the 14th century during the Yuan. Matteo Ricci sailed on the Grand Canal, as did Lord Macartney on his trip back south after failing to sway the Qianlong Emperor to take Britain seriously. On his way back south, Lord Macartney made many observations that led him to report back to the head office that, if push came to shove, Britain could force China to trade with them. The Qing imperial court took the Grand Canal quite seriously, but Towards the winter of the Qing dynasty, in 1855, there was another incident of the dikes being let go, allowing the waters of the Yellow River to rush over the Taiping rebels and wreck the Grand Canal in the process. You can imagine, come the 1870s and 80s, with railroads being built all over China, it didn't bode so well for the future of the Grand Canal. As the rail network expanded, and certainly with the proliferation of autos and trucks, the importance of the Grand Canal became greatly diminished. And sadly, once again, the Grand Canal fell into disrepair. And on July 2nd, 1901, the Grand Canal was officially closed as a national transport link. With the Qing dynasty on its deathbed, there were no funds available to maintain it and keep it operational. But it rose again. After 1949, the new PRC government put a lot of their limited resources into reviving at least parts of the Grand Canal. In 1933, over in the USSR, Stalin had built his own Grand Canal that linked the Baltic with the White Sea. It used to be called the Stalin White Sea-Baltic Canal, but after Khrushchev threw him under the bus, it became known as the White Sea-Baltic Canal. Stalin, of course, used the same kind of conscripted labor that Emperor Yang used back in the 6th century. And not to be outdone, Mao wanted to restore the Grand Canal, not only for the same obvious uses that served his ancestors well going back more than 13 centuries, it also had a degree of propaganda value as well. And in a communist regime, a few things out-trump the value of propaganda. In 1958, Mao called for a major dredging project to bring parts of the Grand Canal back to life. And during the Great Leap Forward years and the Great Famine that came as a result of these policies, work on the canal continued. And like it was in Sui Yangdi's day, not all of the workers volunteered of their own free will. I read that of the estimated 160 million cubic meters of earth dug during those years, only 3.7 million of that figure was excavated using machinery, less than 3% of the digging. But the improvements made in between the Great Leap and the Cultural Revolution were significant. Today, the main sections of the Grand Canal are being used as part of the massive South-North Water Diversion Project, an infrastructure project that will relieve the northern parts of China, where water is scarce, by redirecting resources from the more water-abundant south. The eastern route of the project will divert water from the Yangtze River via the Grand Canal to the northern provinces. And work began in 2002, with Phase 1 completed in 2013. And this section of the project involves improvements on existing canals and building new pumping stations and water reservoirs. The central and western routes will also depend on the Yangtze River, but don't involve the Grand Canal. A lot of critics are predicting future disasters from this project, but desperate times deserve desperate measures. North China has historically always fallen victim to drought, and southern China has always been blessed with ample water. Time will tell if any or all of the environmental consequences critics are warning about actually happen. After 14 centuries of construction, repair, and maintenance, the Grand Canal's shape has transformed into several different versions. During the Sui and Tang, the Grand Canal was Y-shaped. During the Yuan, Ming, and Qing, it took on an I-shaped appearance. The Sui brought the canal up to Luoyang, and in the Yuan, it was brought to Beijing. And for 1,331 years, from the Sui to the Qing, the Grand Canal was the lifeline that brought grain shipments first to Chang'an, then to Luoyang, then Kaifeng, and finally to Beijing. In 1984, discussions were held in China to begin a revival of the Grand Canal, recognizing it still had value to the China economy. By then, it was horribly polluted, silted over, and in many parts had completely disappeared. And then in 2006, the State Council announced the entire Grand Canal from Beijing to Hangzhou was a national key cultural relic. And with that, steps were taken to promote the Grand Canal as a World Heritage Site, and this was achieved on June 22, 2014. For the entirety of its existence, the Grand Canal always had two main enemies. One was the high sediment content that required constant dredging of the waterways, and the other was the Yellow River that time and again flooded, changed course, and as I mentioned in a couple instances, though there were more, when the Yellow River was purposely unleashed on the landscape, it would destroy everything in its path, including parts of the Grand Canal. Despite all the upheavals and all that nature and humankind could do to destroy it, more than 1,400 years later, the Grand Canal is still, in many parts, a working and operational transport system. In June of 2021, the China Grand Canal Museum opened in the city of Yangzhou, a city that owed much of its fame and importance due to its proximity to the Grand Canal. If you'd like to learn more than I've been able to convey in this short overview, go visit the museum, and everything you ever wanted to know and more is available for you to experience and learn. And if that's not enough, there's also a Grand Canal Museum on the outskirts of northeast Hangzhou, and if I'm not mistaken, there are also other museums elsewhere that feature the history of the Grand Canal. Okay, let's roll the credits and allow me to sign off. I thank all of you for listening. This is Laszlo Montgomery bidding you a fond adieu from the city of Los Angeles. Please consider coming back again next time for another exciting episode of the China History Podcast.
Time is precious, and so are our pets. So time with our pets is extra precious. That's why we started Dutch. Dutch provides 24/7 access to licensed vets, with unlimited virtual visits and follow-ups for up to 5 pets. You can message a vet at any time and schedule a video visit the same day. Our vets can even prescribe medication for many ailments, and shipping is always free. With Dutch, you'll get more time with your pets and year-round peace of mind when it comes to their vet care.